Hey, good afternoon, folks. I'm your host, Chad Jenkins of the Christ Over Fear podcast. We are live today, December 6th, 2023, episode number 38. Remember, you can get this and any of the episodes on any of your podcast platform players that you prefer, as well as our YouTube channel at Christ Over Fear. Army Navy week coming up. Obviously, it's this week, Army Navy game this Saturday. It's long overdue. I should have had Al Moore, my guest today on the show, months and months and years ago, because Al means that much to me. But with it being Army Navy week, I had to bring in an ultimate Army football brother, ultimate Army football warrior, and Army warrior. Al and I were in the same company at West Point, G1 Go Greeks. And then Al was a year younger than me. So he graduated in 2003 from West Point. I was 2002. But Al and I we forged a bond as offensive lineman, quarterback relationship, how that goes. But then when you're at West Point, you forge a relationship with guys who are also in your company. So Al and I not only got to be with each other up at Mikey Stadium and on the football fields, but then we got to be together down within the Corps of Cadets as well. And him, Anthony Miller, myself, Mike Schwartz, Craig Cunningham. That was our tribe within G1 as far as Army football players. So I know that probably is putting a smile on his face thinking back to those good old days. But Al and I'll ask him when I have him on, but I mean, I don't know that we had a hardcore openness of faith that we do today in Christ when we were young cadets and in our, late teens, early 20s there at West Point. So I can't wait to hear his story of what the Lord has done in his life and to give him a platform to come on and share with everyone and share with, fellow Army football players that we got the privilege and honor to play with, but then others who he has ultimately impacted in his life, because there's no doubt Al Moore, once you meet him, the affectionate individual that he is, people gravitate towards him. He's got a light. And so without a doubt, it's going to impact people when they hear this story. I've also got to say, what makes it special with Al and I is it was my first combat deployment, his first combat deployment, but we actually got to be together in Iraq, actually doing combat operations together in Iraq, which was unusual because as large as the Army is, you don't often run into fellow teammates that, at least I didn't run into a ton of teammates on the battlefield, but running into Al and actually, his element provided protection for my platoon quite a few times, actually. So just having that camaraderie and that depth of a relationship, I'm just excited to have him on. So without further ado, and I got to get some street cred. Let me give some background. So graduate of 2003 at West Point, and then he did get his MBA at UNC Chapel Hill in 2015. Kind of always been in the government sector after he left the Army after 6 years of service, and he was with L3, and then his most recent and the company he's with now is Palantir as well. So I wanted to give that tidbit on that front. Without further ado, my man Al Moore, what's up, buddy?
Not much, Chad. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast on Christ Over Fear. It's definitely an honor to be here. Really excited for the discussion and just the opportunity to connect and get the message out for everything that you talked about. So yeah. Thank you very much, also too, for the kind and generous introduction.
Wow, that was I could go on for a long time on that front, but I wanted to share real quick with the audience because I thought this was pertinent. Al sent to me this morning which I think sums up kind of every episode we try to do here. This is the 38th, but he sent this to me and I just want to read it to everybody because I think every one of us, and this is what this show is about, but it's also every one of us has to be equipped with what this verse is. So this is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. I'm just going to read it. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. but do this with gentleness and respect. And so Al sent that to me this morning, just so everybody who's listening or who will listen later knows. And I read it this morning, Al, after you sent it. I was like, man, how true is that? And then I know in my olden days, I'd kind of get almost too like theological in it and be like, okay, I have to have the perfect answer of if anybody ever asks and all that. And it really, it's not that difficult. My pastor down in Florida, it's like, hey man, just say what the Lord's done in your life. It's as easy as that authentic answer, which maybe people struggle to do. I even, if I'm not ready, can kind of all and over it. So I'm going to leave that up to you, though, Al. I just want to hear that story. I want to hear your story, what it was like when you got to West Point, because I know you're a prep school guy like me, what your faith was like in those days or in your early days, and just bring us up to speed to present day on that front. I know it's open-ended, but the platform is yours, buddy.
No, I like it and appreciate it. It's interesting to, in seeing that verse come up a little bit too, because, one of the things that's really been key in my life, and I'll get to the backstory in a little bit, but one of the things that's been key in my life, I'd say for the past 5 years is, reading scripture every morning before doing something. I think that's been one of the best things, just in terms of strength, in terms of happiness, drive, focus. It really is phenomenal. And definitely it was one of my older pastors, Jonathan Feidig, who got me doing that. And, he had another good, kind of quote to a little bit. And he said, you don't always have to remember everything you've read from the Bible. You don't have to remember everything that I've preached or that you have been a part of. It's kind of like, I can't remember what I had for dinner last Tuesday, but I know I didn't go to bed hungry. So it's kind of that same concept that it is somewhat of a cumulative process. But,
let me ask you, can I ask you something just for now? So that's the first thing you do once you typically get up. Is it, because I always find this interesting, is it Bible app? Is it, old school, hard Bible? Is it a variation? Is it a hybrid? What do you do on that front? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's all Bible app. And I mean, the Holy Bible app and is just such a great application to a little bit too for, one, the ability to search, but it's also too, is that, sometimes you don't know what you need a little bit, or I don't know what I need every morning. I may have some concerns, something troubling me a little bit on this one too, but I feel like that's always kind of a good way. Whatever algorithm they use to provide, that verse of the day is definitely something very good. But then it's also too, I'd say the plans that the Holy Bible app does are absolutely phenomenal. Because you have, guest preachers, everything, from Jim Godchell, who I'm a big fan of there, and then, to Rich Froning. And, just some of them that are really good. And I'll usually do those before kind of a workout in the morning, another part of the routine 6 days a week is just absolutely critical. I mean, sometimes, after reading that before going to exercise, I'm ready to conquer the world.
Yeah.
And it just is amazing, the strength that God can reach down and give you if you're listening. And it really is just phenomenal with that.
And how long have you been doing that, Al? What would you say that? I mean,
5 years, about 5 years.
5 years. Yeah. Is that what you said? All right.
Yeah. And it was, it was kind of a, always had a little bit of religion, a little bit too, going forward on that one too. But one day my pastor saw me a little bit distressed, came up, spoke to me, we had lunch, prayed over it. He just told me, hey, he said, hey, I'm going to give you this Bible app. I want you to read one Psalm a day. And from going from that, of a 30-day assignment to now it's, however many, 365 times 5, it's pretty good in a lot of it too. But just, especially the plans and taking that and being able to share those with people in my life has absolutely been phenomenal. Because I think there's a lot of good teachings and a lot of good ways to interpret the scripture that can give you strength in everyday opportunities.
Yeah. Well, then let's go there. Let's go reverse of that. So 5 years ago is when you really started, you had that lunch with your pastor, but bring us up to speed on previous to that. Where was your faith? How did growing up or once you got to West Point, how was that? What did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, growing up, I was raised Presbyterian and we had, I'd say we were raised, kind of middle of the road a little bit too, where religion and going to church every Sunday was important, but we never really had open discussions on it between my parents and myself, my younger brother, about religion, about, kind of ways to grow in our faith and ways to test that. We would go to church every Sunday. My brother and I would go to Sunday school. My parents were ushers and would do a lot of stuff to be involved in the church a little bit too, with kind of trying to help out somewhat too, but it was never really anything more I felt than layer deep a little bit. And that's
Mhm.
certainly not a fault of my parents. That's just the way they were. But then it's also too, I'd say, the first time my faith was tested is I was 10, and my mom developed breast cancer. My brother was 5, pretty serious, had to go through a lot of chemotherapy, radiology. She beat it that first time, and then 4.5 years later, she contracted it again, and that was ultimately timely. And unfortunately took her life when I was 15 and my brother was 10.
Mhm.
During that time, it was a very difficult phase in my life, freshman in high school, trying to figure out what I'm doing, where I fit in, looking for a dad who was all of a sudden a single dad. And coming from there a little bit, I'd say that was really when I first started to grow my faith. My mom throughout her final months was very religious, was very much, was praying, was very much involved. And I remember after she passed away, being angry at God and having, some remorse that, I assume, most 15-year-olds would have, but
Right.
realize that, a lot of that anger and hate was not good. And despite, choices that my brother and dad made a little bit too, where, they really stopped going to church and, stopped having much of a religious belief a little bit too for a while, just because of, anger and resentment that they had. I felt like I grew a little bit in faith at that time, and knowing that
Mm.
she's in a better place, knowing, the impact and the strength that she gave us and everything that she did to really empower me, and empower my family a little bit to grow from her, and use her as motivation to drive from that,
Eh,
take care of ourselves and lead that.
how long, Al? I mean, recalled this, but I mean, just now hearing it when, we're a little bit older and, have a little bit more just age behind us. I mean, I can't. I mean, I wish I had, I wish I had the compassion of a 44-year-old when I was, 20, when we were at
Yeah.
West Point together, right?
Mhm.
Or 19, whatever. But just hearing it now, I mean, and you at 15 experiencing that, and your brother at 10, and I know you, the three of you, because I just remember at, after Army football games, and your brother and your dad were always there. But
Mhm.
even then, I mean, if I think about it now, like, and maybe you disagree, but from my periphery, you kind of were the glue. You were not that, I mean, your dad was awesome. I mean, I remember him embracing me and your brother, and seeing you guys, but like I could tell, like, you were the glue of that. You were the
Mhm.
glue of that. Like, how quickly after 15, you talk about the grieving and being angry, and of course you're going to be at that age and not understanding, and grief lasts for a lifetime, then, and we go through different stages. But how did you navigate that, like, and how long was that journey
Mhm.
of processing that, and changing it from anger and resentment and bitterness to, hey, like, I'm going to use my mom's life as a catapult to be a light for others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was somewhat of a, kind of just a general build out of the process a little bit on that one too, where
Mhm.
I went from anger and resentment of being 15 and a freshman to, growing in faith as I got to be a little bit older, probably 17 and 18. And then I'd
Mhm.
say certainly looking, getting older, getting recruited like you did for, to West Point and other schools a little bit too, and looking, at faith to guide that decision. But for me, I knew I couldn't go off to a place like West Point and without, strength of God, without the strength of the Lord, without really having Jesus in my heart. Uh,
Mhm.
and that was a lot of what I learned there. But I think it was, from a greater perspective, is that, when my mom passed away and my dad really had a tough time with it, he didn't seek the counseling and services that he needed. And I think that ultimately drove him to alcoholism, and ended up costing him his life, several years later. But what really I took from that is that, life is going to be hard. Life's going to be brutal. It's going to cut you down, and no one is going to, they're not going to say, oh yeah, we'll let you into West Point because your mom passed away. It's not that, but knowing that I needed to work, I needed to find a way to really kind of get myself ahead, using that motivation, that drive that my mom instilled in me, using that religious faith was just so critical. And I think that was one of the first times, that I started to see and really kind of take to heart a lot of what I was learning. And I think it absolutely, magnified going off to the West Point prep school. The thing I love about the Army, and the thing, that was great about West Point, the prep school, is, they're always going to make religious services available. And I think, that's something always to know, is that, the military and the Army don't really know all the other services, but assume it's the same, wants you to continue your faith, wants you to continue to have that, and being able to have those resources, especially at the prep school, Sunday, being able to go to church off post and get that privileges. And then, at West Point, having the different opportunities from obviously services, but, fellowship of Christian athletes, and just having that outlet was so necessary. And I think that was so good. So I think just continuing to build on that, continuing to grow in faith each time of, looking back now and understanding what I know is that, God will continue to test you, but he's never going to give you more than you can't handle. And everything that he puts on your plate, sees that's fit for you. He's not overloading you. He's training you up, somewhere in the off season, we'd work out, try to get bigger, faster, stronger to do that. I feel like God's really helping me grow in my faith over and over, as challenges continue to mount, because, it too, we know it, is that, you get into that situation where you're young, it's you that you're looking out for and everything. But then when you get into become a father, you can't fail. And it gets to those situations that I think it's absolutely understanding that faith and helping to not only teach that, but impart that faith to children and others. It's absolutely critical.
Well, and I love your point about West Point, the prep school. The Army in general, and having that, because I think that can be lost in, the media world and everything else. And I think the two sports that I really, I'm sorry, not two sports, but the one sport, and then, and I am obviously biased because it's football, but I think football, whether it's National Football League or even college, and then our armed forces, the military, like, that's where faith and faith in Christ is, like, still, and I think unashamed, unapologetic. I mean, teams run out and they, take a knee at the end zone or whatever and have that moment. You see NFL guys come together after the games, opposite teams, and go to the 50-yard line and kneel and pray together. And I think that's, whether a person is not there yet or just looking at it from the periphery and maybe not offended by it, but it doesn't know what those individuals have. I think that's a strong testament to be doing what, First Peter chapter 3 verse 15 is, just being that light and constantly displaying it and living it out. So I guess I even remember I think we did it both under Coach Sutton and under Todd Barry, but we do the Lord's Prayer before our football games, and I was, I'm not going to lie, Alex, I was pretty much a heathen at that time. I had not, it wasn't until Anthony Miller's funeral that I accepted Christ, when we were down there in Virginia, is where I accepted Christ as my savior. And so, but I grew up kind of exposed to church, going to church, and, very, not every day, not or week or anything like that. But it wasn't like it was, we weren't an anti-Jesus family. It wasn't an emphasis in our life, but I wasn't opposed to it. So I think what you're saying about West Point and the prep school and even the Army, like those who maybe aren't there yet, it gives them the ability to find more and to see what it's about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right on that. And, you look at a lot of those stars, and I mean, looking at kids' generation these days too, and, how big social media is on that. I think it's great to see, you see certain athletes, like Brock Purdy, and especially Patrick Mahomes, that are free and open to talk about their faith, Jalen Hurts, a lot of these stars that are out there saying this too. And I mean, talk about a powerful message that brings forward. It's absolutely phenomenal to see it.
Well, and reaching the next generation. I mean, CJ Stroud, he's another one that's huge on that. And just, all these kids, the middle school, elementary school kids soaking that up. It's awesome. And letting them see. So no, I think that's really, pretty cool to see. Now tell me about, like, what about overseas? So you can stay at the Army, West Point, Army football or whatever, but what was it like, during those deployments and all of that for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was different a little bit too, each time on that one too. So first time, and just one of the backstory, I think that was one of the coolest opportunities ever when, we met up in Chaldea, Iraq, and, you were with 10th Mountain, I was with First ID, and, I had the chance to kind of like what I felt like block for you again, going down some of those, more dangerous MSR routes. So that was just amazing too. But I think the first time, I'd say first deployment, we were really just a battalion off by ourselves, or task force off by ourselves. Religion was very important for me. I brought over my Bible. I definitely knew it was going into harm's way. Before going over, I had to serve as a casualty assistance officer for another second lieutenant. Another armor officer, 2003 grad. He was University of Kentucky. He was killed, and I remember escorting his fiance and his father, who was a full colonel, and their family around too, and the impact that took. So definitely, prayed a lot, thought a lot on that, and definitely brought religion forward with me. And I think it was an area too that I definitely had a lot of faith internally, but it was difficult for me to talk about it with others. And, on that one, I think it was one of the situations too. And looking back, and this is, the advantage of being 44 versus 24 in some of those situations there. But, you look back and what you don't know then, about potentially reaching out and not being seen or held in a negative light when, as a second lieutenant, you're obviously just trying to build rapport with your soldiers. You're just trying to show them that, hey, I'm a competent officer. I'm going to lead you, successfully on this one. I'm going to look out for you, put your safety, put my trust in the NCOs, learn from them, and that learn to lead concept. And I think, bringing Christ and bringing religion along, I was a little bit afraid to do that. And also, we didn't really have, I'd say, some of the other support resources. So it was much more of an internal source then, and then obviously we suffered a lot of casualties. It was, it was rough. I remember being in country for about a week and a half, and we had a M113 that was destroyed, and lost about 6 soldiers in that. So that was difficult. And then
and that was that first deployment, Al?
Yeah, first deployment. Yeah. On that one, and then it's I was an armor officer by trade. Went off to Armor OBC. Battalion commander said, "Hey, get over here. We've got a real mission to fulfill." Been in country about a week, and there was a pretty massive firefight, pretty strong engagement, and a mech infantry platoon leader had a RPG come through the turret of his Bradley. He lost his leg, gunner lost his arm, and I found myself that 12 hours after that firefight, I was taking over a mech infantry platoon. I was not an infantry officer. Obviously, I'd done a lot of it at West Point, and I think it's going back to some of the days of being 300 pounds almost and trying to, hump up and down the hills of Camp Buckner versus, all right, you're in Iraq. It's a no BS environment. There's no room for failure. Definitely had to put a lot of faith in God, and obviously in training, and, what we learned on the football field was another big aspect of that. But I think it's, you get thrown into a lot of situations. And I do remember thinking back, I'm like, okay, I've been through hardships before. I've gone through difficult situations where, I need to step up and lead. And I think honestly, without the strength from God, without being able to pray, without being able to, just understand everything going on there, but, having that beauty of being young and saying, all right, we're going to get back, go at it again, get back up, go at it again, and learning from that, I think was absolutely critical.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point on what he had brought you through previous to that, and that relying upon where you saw him show up previously when you're 15, when you're 17 or 18 and getting ready to leave to go to West Point, when you're going through all that those, those faith steps then led you to where you said, okay, I can still rely upon you to get me through this. I think that's powerful, man. I think a lot of times we can forget, or a lot of times I sometimes like, I need to reflect back on all the things that he's brought me through, so that the current situation doesn't get to be out of hand in my head, but relying upon him is what I fall back on. And it sounds like that's what you were doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a lot of really internal faith that was brought up. And I think it's, relying back exactly like you said on that one too. And you talk about, I'm drawing a blank on the phrase, but, where Jesus talks about, hey, my yoke is, take my yoke, my load is light and my shoulders are broad.
Right.
And giving that. And, seeing that, I kind of see that in a couple of ways. And, like what your pastor said a little bit about, don't trying to get too theological on it too, but a little bit of taking, hey, you can lean on Jesus, you can lean on God, you can lean on your faith to carry you through a lot of it. But it's also too, I see it that he's also helping me, helping all of us to get stronger on this one too. So, that yoke may be too heavy for you when you're 20, when you're 35, 40, it's light on this one. And that's how you grow in your spiritual faith, that I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And then, so that sounds like that was, I mean, it doesn't sound like it was a very difficult deployment on that front. And then just kind of walk us through, I guess, from that time frame and then your transition out of the Army, and or if it even the second deployment, but then to where you are, I guess, at that 5 years ago, where now all of a sudden you're like, I'm getting into the Word every single morning when I wake up.
And it kind of had a little bit, and that's a great point, because, I had a lot of faith there, and then really just kind of be, don't want to call it, a toe dipping Christian a little bit, but would go to church, but was really not as involved, with the church that I wanted to be after that first tour, get out of the Army, separate, and kind of find myself, I think, like a lot of other soldiers doing, like, what did I just do? Something that I have only known for the past, 11 years, coming from West Point, from the prep school, in high school, wanting to be focused on that. I went back into the reserves and, still serving the reserves, which I absolutely love, but it's a major life change and a major swing. And, it was something there that, I was lucky to find a very good church in 2009, 2010, that kind of helped to, kind of keep the faith going a little bit, carry that on. Going through, just different career transitions, moved to San Diego for a year, lived in Philadelphia, moving around a lot. So didn't really have that stability, but I think it's coming back to, where I am now, just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and really finding, a good church, finding a very strong pastor, who I talk about, Pastor Jonathan, who I credit with a lot of my faith moving forward in that. And then, getting into reading the scripture every day, building that up, have our second child on that one too. We had our daughter in 2016 and then son in 2019, and then obviously things started unraveling a little bit, for me personally later in 2019. And, it came into some difficult situations. I found myself a lot of times of really having to, shoulder the burden of both really mother and father, having to step in both, along with being a full-time working dad, a reservist, and then boom, COVID-19 hits. And, some of that was different for everyone, but part of it was a little bit of a blessing for me. And I look at, some of the challenges that I dealt with during 2020, and just the strength that God gave me was insane. Chad, and looking on that and being able to read the scripture, I think that was the year that, it's almost kind of like a super boost that I got, but I say that was the year that I grew the most in faith, showing me what I had the potential to do on that one too. And then I'd always had tried to live my life by, Proverbs 27:17, and, as iron sharpens iron, so as one person sharpens another. And I really see that as, be the leader, grow leaders, do that law of explosive growth where, try to grow 2 leaders and get them to grow 2 leaders. But doing that year, I'd say, really empowered me a lot. And I just felt like God was giving me the strength to say, Alex, you can do anything right now. Like, it goes back to, I don't mean to kind of keep quoting scripture a little bit, but
no, are you kidding me? This is what this show's about, dude.
That's perfect. Yeah. Because
you don't have like a 30-second soundbite to throw it in. You can talk it all day long. You can throw it all out.
I appreciate it, brother. Yeah. And then, looking at Philippians 4:13 and just having the scripture memorized, but obviously, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And, one of our good, good brothers and teammates, Eris Como, I remember that was always his saying, that he had to sign everything. Still got a team ball with his signature on there too, but I didn't really understand, let's take that back. I didn't really, embody that phrase until 2020. And I mean, just the strength and power that I felt that Christ gave me, that God gave me that year, was just incredible. And having that certain scripture memorized, but then it's also taking some of the different plans, learning, continuing to learn, and you just build that suit of armor, that strength up a little bit too. I always relate it back to, do physical fitness, keep us in strength and everything too. And, still like to do a lot of like heavy lifting and Olympic lifts because, despite being 44, I want to pretend I'm 25. But from a spiritual fitness phase, I always feel like, God is helping to build us up. And there's a lot of great people out there. And I've been truly blessed with a lot of strength that God has given me and just a lot of, I'd say, the ability to keep growing and putting a lot of the right people in my life and, the right situations to build me up, because it's, learning from those experiences at West Point, learning from combat. 2016 was, when I lost my father, but he had a lot of health issues that really went downhill, and, in being more of the father and taking care of him and going through all of that. But I say nothing prepared me for, everything in the past 3-4 years, that God didn't give me strength for. And it became that thing of, throw something else at me. Honestly, on this one too, I can do anything. And honestly, I've taken that strength to, my corporate world and being much more involved in my church now. But, I think that's the beauty of faith and the beauty of platforms like this that you have a little bit too. And just, talking about how, different superstars are able to share their faith a lot too. It's just phenomenal, because I think the more people grow in faith, the more confidence they have in themselves, the more they're able to do, the more they're able to build out. And it's, it's an awesome feeling. It's excuse my language, but it's a kick-ass high.
Yeah, no, dude, I don't worry about that. I think though, I want to talk about this because this fires me up a little bit, a lot. However, I think it's unique. That's why I'm sitting on my daughter. My daughter is 16. She always makes fun of me because she's like, "You never can get out what you're trying to say." Like, she's like, "Just say it. Like, what are you trying to say?" Like, it's hilarious. But what I think is very powerful about what you just said, Al, is your confidence that you had. The confidence you had that you were like, bring it on. Whatever else you got, bring it on. Adversary, whether that, all right, Satan, bring it on. What do you got next? Because you knew who you had. You knew you had the Lord on your side. You knew you were with the Lord in that. And I think that's a great mentality. I don't know that all Christians, not all, but I don't know that many Christians in today's world have that. We sometimes, myself included, kind of get in this victim mentality, like, oh, here it is, like this victim, like, because we have declared our love of Christ, that all of a sudden, like, things are going to unravel. Where I like that when you were in the fire, when you're going through the fire with Christ at the helm, you're like, that's confident, and that's true. That's what my old pastor was, chutzpah. Chutzpah is like a Hebrew term for like having this confidence that's of the Lord. And like, man, you're displaying that out. You just told that story. I mean, that you're walking that, and you're like, bring it on. And I think I share that. I wanted to pause on that because I think there's many, myself included, who can listen to that and take that with us, that like, we don't have to be, I guess I'm going to ask you, like, I think yours that you sent me today of First Peter chapter 3, verse 15, used meekness. This used, gentleness and respect. I struggle with like meekness because I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I don't naturally gravitate towards meekness, but like, how do you do it where you don't offend, or do you not care if you offend in your confidence of the Lord? Like, what's that look like? I know
I think that's a great question on that one too, because a lot of what I see on meekness is that, a couple different things is that obviously, a platform like this, I'm going to share, that confidence and that, hey, bring it on. I can throw and take anything, at me a little bit on that. And, you look at the concept of meekness, and it's almost, I see it as a concept of servant leadership, where applying a different type of leadership and a different approach to everyone is really the best way to go forward in that. And I think if you look at, meekness, I kind of equate that a little bit with humility, and I'm not 100% certain, if the two are really synonymous there, but I think that in looking at meekness is that, yes, the Lord gives us strength. Yes, I have a lot of power through Christ, I feel like I can do all things. I can do anything. But at that time too, I don't need to be boastful about it. I don't need to be, overbearing on this one to the point that it's going to turn people off, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously, everybody has their challenges. Everybody's gone through some different trials and tribulations. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people look back and say, man, I just, wish I had that person's life, and I wish I had that person's life, and they've got no problems and no issues. And everybody has their concerns. So therefore, really when talking about faith and when talking about the Lord on this one too, it's critical to take a different approach with all of
Mm-hmm.
that, and sometimes it needs to be much more tempered. But the way that I really see that more so too is, having the humility that, I'm not going to go out and say, I can do anything, throw it on, and, whatever, God's got my back. I think it's still somewhat tempered that, he's
Right.
going to give me strength for the problems that I have, but, he's not going to let me go out and, I can't go out and run 200 miles right now. I can't go out and, just different challenges that, are probably out of the spectrum right there. I think it's having that humility, that meekness a little bit to really see a role and look at what's going to be the best approach to help our neighbors.
Man, I love that. What a great answer, dude. That was sweet. And thank you for that. I needed to hear that. That's my nugget. That's my Al Moore nugget of the day right
I
there.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, and it just makes me think of how you very eloquently described, like, and that is leadership, how we have to treat each individual differently, because what one will gravitate towards and respond to might completely turn another off, whether that's our kids, whether that's our neighbors, whether that, I'm looking outside right now, my neighbor, whether that's co-workers,
Mhm.
subordinates at work, superiors at work, whoever. We're having that ability to be truly like a servant leader, as you said, a people person, where you understand the situation and what might be a better approach versus coming right out, but then some others respond to that. So
Mhm.
I like how that is. What do you do? So 2016, 2019. So I'm not good at math, dude. How old are your kids now?
So 7 and 4.
7 and 4. 7 and 4. And I guess I mean, they're still pretty young. I know you texted me saying you guys go to church and do all of that and they're into it. But I guess, what are you doing now with them? I think this is a fair question. What are you doing now with them that maybe you wish would have been done, with you at that age? Like from a growing them in their faith.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely on this one. So I think it's more so, with my daughter who's 7, my son being 4, and unfortunately, my meathead gene is here and he's like way up here. So it's exponential because I grew that from my dad. So, he's a little bit far off and everything, or
I
not
love
far
it.
off, but has a couple more years and
Right.
just
No, I mean, he's 4. I mean,
yeah,
he's a 4 and he's a healthy boy who's
yeah,
like not gonna be like, "Hey, son, sit down and let's do a Bible study together."
exactly. Now he's like, Dad, I'm gonna take out your knees, and that's more what he's looking at. But
Uh-huh.
I think the cool thing that I really love and really cherish is being able to have the discussions with my daughter. And, I'm sure like, with your 16-year-old, I mean, she's got me wrapped around her finger, and I
Yeah.
love every single second of it too. And especially growing up, just pretty much, all male household for most of the time. It's just really great to see her grow with faith a little bit too. Some of the discussions we've had, challenges we've gone through, and talking about really more, basic elements on this one too. Just, the love that God has for you. And I think, brought up a little bit too, is that, we were talking about, Dad loves you and Daddy will do anything for you. And she's like, I know you love me, but nobody loves me as much as God. And that,
Wow.
that really, just made my heart grow. And
Uh-huh.
I think it's, in doing that too, and then having more of the discussions a little bit, so the way my church does it is really nice for, second, third grade under, is they do what's called Building Lives on Christ, where you come up to the church for a little bit, see the adults, participate in everything for some of the opening part. And then they have a children's moment and bring all the children up to, the front steps in the church. And, either the pastor talks to them or one of the youth leaders, and they really take whatever the sermon is going to be for the day and for the messages, and they, convey that into kids' terms. And
Mhm.
not only is it great for all of the adults to be able to see the kids up there, see some of the answers that they get, but just seeing that and seeing kind of the thought process that goes through on her head, and then discussing that. afterwards to, where it's the point that I love is that, we can talk about what she learned in building lives on Christ, some of the crafts that she did. She was more fired up this year for Vacation Bible School than I think I was on this one too. I mean, she was jumping at the bit. It was in August, and it was, Vacation Bible School was in August. I think she was asking like, hey, can you make it earlier in the year? Like, can you pull this up a little bit? Why can't we do 2 weeks and going forth? And I loved it too, because, it's not just the friends and the games, but it's the growing in faith. And I think the messages she takes away that she absolutely loved. And that's just great. And I think it's doing that. I think, the best thing that my parents instilled in me was also too, being a part of a church community, growing in faith there, and then also volunteering and helping out, not just going in and out and checking in and out. But I think for everything, looking back that I can remember, my parents did a good job of instilling faith in my brother and I. And I think it's, just given certain terms of, my mom getting sick and then her being the one that probably had to carry it along most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit difficult because I think my dad was a lot angrier than my mom was. So it was just that, but going back to her pre-cancer years, they always did that. And I always want to make sure that I do that where, it gets to be the one that, she always wants to go to church, which is always nice. And, my son always wants to go too, which is really, really phenomenal for me to see on that one too. It's never a fight to get him out of the house. And just being able to grow in faith with them and, talking about what I read on the Bible app and lessons that I learn. And, they see some of the scripture that I have down in the gym that I have in my basement, and understanding that. So I think it's some of those little messages that impart.
Yeah, man, that's all. Well, and I just think it's, that's our main. And it's even more difficult. I mean, you're walking it, as you are as their father, and wearing the other hats as well. But I mean, that's our main fire team, right? Our main fire team is them. Like, that's the ultimate fire team that we have is our household and our kids, to try to do as best we can to set them up for a life where they know they can rely. And it's got to be them. I mean, at a certain point, like with my daughter and my son, they're, 16, 13 now, it's like time for them to take ownership of their personal relationship, right? Like there's a transition of like, now it's like, I hope everything we've talked about and everything you see from my walk, like then that becomes a part of their lives that they know, like, we can't give them that salvation. They can only get that through their personal relationship with Christ. So it's kind of a transition period, if you will, but them seeing that and seeing what you do each and every day, that will obviously wash over them and like encourage them to follow suit, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what do you do on what do you do like as iron sharpens iron? Like, what are you part of any group, like small groups or men group, or what do you do on that? Or do you do anything? Are you looking or exploring on that front, or what's that look like for Al Moore?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, it really is, I serve as a deacon in my church and doing that a little bit, but I think it's more so as iron sharpens iron, what I'm always looking to do, be it, in my job and professional capacity, especially in the Army Reserves, which, for me gets back to what I love to do, working at the church, serving as my daughter's soccer coach, to do that, to really show them a lot of what right looks like, for my children on that too. And then it's also to set the example, I want to say, for, others that I work with and, others that I may be friends with on this one too, is, how do I really show what right looks like too? Because growing up, I had a lot of times too, where people say like, oh, don't turn up like me, do this, do that. It's easy to say that. It's hard to show what right is. And I think showing what right is the best way to do that. And it's also too, in looking at and, iron sharpening iron. So one person sharpening another is one, being a leader in any situation that I can step into on this one too. How can I help? I'm not going to complain. I'm saying, hey, I want to help out and get involved, be it if it's something in the neighborhood, something with friends, or really something in the community. Hence, trying to coach my daughter's soccer team, or be involved, at one of their schools and just helping out as a guest reader, and going into volunteer, teach Vacation Bible School, being a deacon. So I think it's more different ways, and I think it's with having the men's group, that would be good to do, but it's kind of right now, I'm just, tapped out. little
I
bit.
know, no, you describing all that, I'm like, man, I mean, I was thinking about was your 2020 quote when you're like, all right, bring it on. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot. And Deacon, what was that process, dude? The Deacons, like you gotta, you're high up there, buddy. I don't, now I'm a little, now I'm
Keeping it with
sweating
you,
in my
brother.
seat, dude. What was your Deacon tick? Because don't you have to be like, I don't know, ruled upon or selected by a committee or something? What's that
Yeah,
look like?
you're selected by committee, and the good thing is that I was selected by committee, and with my church, it's First Presbyterian of Media. We've seen a lot of diminishing attendance, I think, on this one too, and the church kind of falling out a little bit. I think that a lot of, I don't want to say religion, but I want to say a lot of church services have seen numbers decline since COVID. Obviously, there's online offerings, and some people do that, but it's the faith of going to worship with
Mhm.
everyone in person, and being, I'll kind of say, younger somewhat too, but then it's also to, having ideas for the church and being one to say, I'm going to step up and help, helping out with a lot of different activities, really kind of just, working with my kids, talking with other people's kids, but then it's also reaching out to those around me and, being involved and seeing how I can make an impact, albeit just a little bit. I mean, some of the smallest things for, just talking to someone at church for 5 minutes and, someone, hey, tell me what's bothering you. Tell me your story a little bit. How can I help?
Mhm.
What can we do to to go forward and do something here a little bit, to getting involved where I actually support. We have a couple soldiers that are deployed overseas, soldiers are family members a little bit too, they're obviously members too, but deployed overseas, with active army units and making sure they have the right care packages. Great thing going back, because obviously you remember those from Iraq of talking, not to digress a little bit, but I love being
Right.
involved with that and saying, hey, all the sweets and all that stuff is really good, but
Right.
if we can send in probably some, protein shakes, beef jerky, tuna, like some real food that will actually,
Right.
along with, like hand sanitizer and all this, like, we didn't even think of that. We just thought just send them cookies. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's good, but the chow hall, you can only eat so much for so long. And I mean, it's good to keep the faith, but I think it's, instead of just, sending them a Bible or a book, just having letters come from kids will be even more motivating than anything.
Right.
It's been great to be involved in that, and from a traditional deacon sense, I think taking not some of the underserved community, but, more of the, some that it may not have been focused on as much, and doing reach out with, some of the college students and with, some of the soldiers a little bit. And, I'm just starting on that process. I think it's being involved in building up the church from, a good core group that we have. And honestly, the thing I'm loving about it is just learning from people who have been deacons longer than me. And I'm kind of in a little bit of receive mode, but, jumping and help where I can. And that concept that I took from the time of being a lieutenant, helped me learn to lead.
Yeah, man. I tell you what a awesome story just to hear everything that he's done in your life, everything that he continues to do in your life. And then, but it's what I say. It's in the Gospels. I don't know exactly where it is, but Christ, he says, I am in you and you are in me.
Mhm.
And I think it's a double-way street where we can't do anything to earn, to uh to earn any more title or any you can't earn your way to salvation with Christ, right? But I think the two-way street is like he won't work in our lives, or he might be quiet in our lives when we're not fully in 100. I've said that about me. I when until I was 100% all in, like it was pretty quiet. It was pretty quiet from him. But
Mhm.
then once I said, okay, you got all of me, all 100%, that's when the work started to be done. And it's just cool to hear. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, that's been Al Moore ever since I've met you in 1998 when you were done with the prep school and coming up as a freshman, as a plebe, and I was a sophomore. So it doesn't surprise me, but I just think your ability to do that and to be such a servant leader for a vast majority, not just your kids, not just your church, but everybody you work with. It's truly inspiring, Al. It really is to continue it for that long. I mean, that's a long wick. That's a long wick that's been burning, which
Yeah.
is impressive. I want to end since it is Army Navy week. I do want to end with and not to put you on the spot, but I know you'll be able to answer. But like, what has or like who or what? I mean, from an Army Football Brotherhood standpoint, like as you started and where you are now at 44, like what relationship has surprised you on, like, them growing in their faith, or you being able to have those talks that maybe you didn't have when we were, football players together, that you do now? Like what relationship has grown from that sport, or has there been any from an Army Football Brotherhood standpoint?
Yeah, I think in general, I think it's a few people from my class, Mike Hastings, Mike Schwartz, definitely grown in faith with them, Patty Heiliger. I think we didn't have a lot of the discussions back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was probably more of the, concept of, hey, we, both of us just may have been afraid to chat about it, and for no
Right.
why.
Kind of like what you were talking about, that second lieutenant time frame too.
Yeah.
Like you're like,
Mhm.
okay, like, but now that you're older and wiser and everything
Mhm.
else, you have those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have those conversations, which is absolutely great. And seeing faith grow with them, and, just trying to think is that, yeah, definitely with that, obviously having the chance to catch up with Eris, and, obviously he's an Army chaplain now. So being able to dive more into a lot of those details is it's just been fun. And, to talk more faith with those guys, and, with how that brotherhood continues to grow from there. And then I think it's just been, different conversations a little bit too. I think, one thing that I want to bring up, Alton McCollum, I know you had Big Mac on your
Yeah.
show a while back, a few months ago.
Yep.
And, I think he and I were able to have that conversation before I deployed overseas, knowing that and seeing that in him, which is just really cool to have that. And then I think it's just being able to do different fellowship with different guys, be it, if they graduated 5 years before us, 10 years after us, having some of that, maybe not as in depth as much as I should, which I would like to, but really being able to, know that that's out there and open that up, I think has been absolutely awesome. I think it's also too with, Josh Holden as well. And that, thinking
Mm-hmm.
of the things too, going back to the golf outing and, being able to pray and just have different discussions on faith, and, love my boy Mead. And I think that's kind of one of the times too, it's always good to chat there. So I think it's growing in faith with a lot of the people from the brotherhood. And I mean, it too, is that West Point, you have that bond, and you said it great in the beginning, but there's no lifelong friends like Army football that
Right.
have brought us all together, and that, we see each other, and it's amazing.
It is. Well, but I think then it can be taken to, that's what I guess was why my question was, because
Mhm.
then it can be taken to a whole other depth that maybe on this, like from a humanistic standpoint, from the human element, you're right. Like an Army Football Brotherhood is one that we will cherish for a lifetime. But
Mhm.
then when you can take it then to a spiritual relationship with an Army Football brother on, a spiritual relationship with Christ, and that guy has it as well. Now it's like a whole other level, and I'm seeing that more and more and more. And that's why I wanted to ask you, because I just think that's like, it's
Mhm.
pretty awesome. And I think you're right. There's like the uneasiness or unsure of what to say, or and I don't know if embarrassment's the right word, but while we were young, but now seeing it years later, it's pretty awesome to see those relationships being formed, and what they're being formed on.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think it's, Chad, with what you're doing is just amazing. I think it's, when you kind of first seeing this podcast, I was, just watching it, and just like, it's awesome. It's kind of like right on, just to say that. So I think the word that you're spreading, bringing that out, and all of us is absolutely awesome. And I think, bringing us all together in faith, thank you for doing that. Thank you for, your service dedication to Christ, and what you do to bring all of us together. Because, I've said it many times, is that, when I was a junior year, senior year playing quarterback, you could say, go jump off the bridge. I wouldn't even hesitate, like in a heartbeat, and I mean, that's, I think, the impact that we all have. So thank you for doing that, because I think, your strength gives me strength, and, helps me to impart it to others as well.
Well, as iron sharpens iron, right, man?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I love you, Al. I
Love you
thank you
too,
for
bro.
coming
Yeah.
on today. I love getting able to see you. I mean, we don't see each other obviously enough, but just
Mhm.
being able to see you up on the screen today and have you on and share your story from start to finish, man. I truly, it was a blessing to not only me, but to everybody who will hear it, for all of our buddies who are our brothers who will hear it. So I truly thank you, man, and I love you.
No, I love you. Thank you too, Chad. This is awesome, brother. Appreciate it. And, Thanks again. Definitely an honor to be here and share faith with you.
Absolutely. All right, man. Go Army, beat Navy.
Be Navy. Let's do it.
All right. See you, buddy.
All right, see you. Have a great one.
You too. All right, folks. Well, I tell you what, that was Al Moore, my teammate at West Point, class of 2003, Army football, played offensive line. And then his story that we just heard was truly inspiring and something I'm thankful for. So that's episode 38 today. Hey, I do have to close episode 38 today under a bit of a circumstance that I wish I didn't have to, but it's one that I have to for the audience, because I know a lot of the audience members, loved this guy, and maybe they're unaware they were impacted by his story. But my guest for episode number 2, which was the very first episode, the very first guest of this show, Lou Mitchell, he passed away from his battle with cancer, pancreatic cancer, last Thursday, November 30th, 2023, at 59 years of age. And obviously, Lou was my direct supervisor when I was an FBI agent out of West Palm Beach. And that man and the impact he had on my life at a time in which I needed it the most was truly impactful on me. Kind of what Al alluded to with his pastor 5 years ago. Lou was a steadfast rock in my life, and I could go to with the very depths of what I needed to share with him. And he was always there for me. He was a man of faith through and through. And so I'm forever thankful to his family who reached out to me when we got the news that he was getting ready to go to hospice. I was able 2 Sundays ago to go visit him in the ICU prior to him getting moved to hospice. And, I just got one final time with Lou here on earth, which was truly a blessing from the Lord, until I get to see him again in heaven one day. But I just want everyone to know it was episode number 2, Lewis Mitchell Jr., David Lewis Mitchell Jr., his full official name. But check that episode out, because he shared his heart in that episode. And Lou lost his son, Christian, in 2013. And Lou goes into depth about that. And I know it can help those out there who may have experienced the same thing. But a buddy of his texted me this morning, who spoke at his funeral, and said, Lou's heart was vacant because of his loss to Christian. It's no longer vacant anymore, because he's reunited with our Father and our Savior, Jesus Christ. And he's also reunited with his son, Christian, in heaven. So we're celebrating his life, and we're celebrating and can rejoice. But we also have pain here, or I know I have sadness and pain and grief as well, because of the man that he is. A man that he was in our lives. So I wanted to let everybody know that on this show. I know it's a bit of sad news, but let us pay tribute to his life, and also be thankful that he is with Christ and he's with Christian once again here in heaven. So that will end episode 38, and we will see you next month, the first Wednesday of the month, for episode 39. Until that time, continue to fight the good fight. Thanks. Bye.